All right, guys, welcome back to episode number 2 of Compliance in the Cloud. So I wanted to take this, the start to our actual compliance journey with AWS CIS and show some basic methodologies that we need to learn in order to set the bedrock actually for this journey going forward. Now, at the end of this actual video series, I hope that you guys walk away with a fully templatized CIS compliance infrastructure as code baseline. I know that's a lot of words. Sorry about that. But you're going to walk away with a templatized version of AWS CIS compliance in the cloud, automating the entire framework, hopefully, that you can then put on your GitHub, your resume, and show a project that you actually completed that can help you get a job. That's the motivation for this entire video series. And I hope that we can kind of accomplish that here. But starting off, what we need to do is we need to actually set up the baseline for what's going to be built on top of. And that's going to be monitoring and logging in the actual AWS cloud itself. Whether you're doing any sort of work in the cloud at all, compliance or not, whether it's just basic operational work or, like I said, compliance framework automation, you're going to have to actually set up monitoring and logging in your AWS environment. It's probably going to be the first thing you're going to do. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. We're going to be setting up an AWS CDK baseline here today. I know I have some previous videos showing how to actually set up the CDK, but in good faith and for us starting this new journey of compliance in the cloud, I'm going to show you guys once again how to just set it up very quickly. I'm going to run through it, and then we're going to get some actual code written down and deployed into our account. Hopefully we can do all this in under 10 minutes, but let's hop right into it. So when you actually grab the CDK, what you're going to do, and I'm going to show you guys here on this little resource, you're going to have to install a few things. So I'm going to install them with you here, as you can see. What I would usually do is I'd install the AWS CDK from NPM. I already have that installed on this Windows PC, I'm pretty sure, so let me just do a CDK version. Nope, I don't. Cool. So we can do the whole thing here. So I'm going to grab this command, and all the links to all these resources will be down in the description below. And be sure to follow me on all my social medias down there if you want to stay up to date with this cloud compliance journey, or you just want to check out other things I'm doing in general. I have a podcast and all that kind of stuff. And also, I've been getting a lot of questions about this plush Sherpa blanket behind me that I posted a picture with. I don't have an affiliate link for it, but just go to your local Target, get one for like $15. They're really, really comfy. So let's actually deploy the AWS CDK or install it here using NPM. And you're going to need a few things here. I think what you need is Node.js, and you're going to need the AWS CLI. Both of those things are going to be in this actual resource. I'm not going to set them up here just because it's going to take a little bit longer, and I want this video to be short and concise. So if we do a CDK version here now, we're going to see that we're on version 1.119. Perfect. And let's see if we can actually run a project here. Okay, so now that you have all of your libraries installed for the CDK, what we're going to do is we're going to initialize our repository or initialize our actual application. So when you think of the CDK, you're going to want to think of the CDK application as a whole as the framework for all of your software, and then the actual stacks in the actual application, those are going to be just your specific templates or baselines. So in order for us to initialize an application here, what we're going to do is we're going to do a CDK init, and then we're going to specify our actual language on the back of it. So if we do, I write all of my infrastructure in TypeScript. Now the reason for that is I basically started with the CDK about 3 years ago when the only language supported was TypeScript. And I had to use it out of necessity, but now I kind of just fell in love with TypeScript because it has static type checking. It's really good for large code bases, but feel free to use Python or JavaScript or Node.js or any of those things that you want to use. I'm going to be using TypeScript for my infrastructure at least. So if we initialize the application here, it's going to, spelled TypeScript incorrectly. Okay, so once that actual application is installing, a number of things are going to pop up that you're first going to see. But in the meantime, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take the AWS CLI that you have installed, and you're going to want to input your session credentials. Now, what I mean by that is you're going to want to do an AWS configure, and it's going to ask you a few different things. So you're going to have the AWS access key ID, you're going to have the AWS secret access key ID, you're going to have the region name, which can be kind of vague. Just put whatever region you're in. And the default output format. So in order for me to get my access key and my secret access key, I'm going to have to come into the AWS console here. I'm going to have to create a user. Let's say CIS compliance user. And this is all under the IAM user services in the AWS console. If you don't have access to the AWS console, I highly recommend that you go through and familiarize yourself with what's going on here. But in essence, this is where you're going to be working, and you're going to be pushing all your code to create infrastructure in the actual account. So I want to give my user both programmatic access and management console access. And then I'm going to add some existing policies such as administrator access. Now, if you're in an organization, you're going to really want to fine tune your permissions because you don't want everyone to have administrator access. It's pretty obvious. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to be just giving myself administrator access so I can get all the programmatic features that we need done. So if we come through here, we'll create the user. And then at the end here, it's going to show my access key ID and my secret access key ID. And don't worry, by the time this video comes out, this user will be absolutely deleted. So have fun trying to copy that key. So if I add the key there, then I add my secret access key here. Then I say US West 2 because I'm in Colorado. Works better. Now I can do a CDK list. Oh, I'm actually going to have to go into the folder. I forgot. And yep, the CDK is all set. And in order to test that the actual AWS CLI is working, I can do an AWS S3 LS. Now, what that's going to do is list all my S3 buckets in my account. Should just have one of them right now. And let's actually delete that bucket because that's going to come in handy when you're actually using the CDK. Sorry if you guys hear a motorcycle right now. Yeah, let's delete this bucket. First, we're going to have to empty it, and then we're going to have to permanently delete it. Now, what you're seeing on screen here, not to confuse you guys, this is going to be where all of your CDK assets are coming from. So that's why you have to bootstrap the account with that bucket itself. So once that's deleted, okay. Now let's exit, and now we can delete. Let's delete that here. Okay, awesome. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come to the actual folder structure here on the left side that you guys can see in the actual IDE. Now, there's a few different things here. So if we go into the actual bin folder, this is going to be the root directory of our application. Let's delete all these comments here. They don't really mean anything to us right now. But as you can see here, I'm specifying a new stack, and I'm importing that stack from the lib folder where the actual child stack lives, right? So if I go into the lib folder, you're going to see a few different things. Now, this is in TypeScript. So again, if you're using Python, don't get a little, discouraged about what's happening here. But essentially in this, class constructor, I'm going to be creating actual resources that I can then deploy in my account. So if we're going based on monitoring and logging, which is what this video is about, we're going to have to deploy a few different things. Now, there's a few examples I want to give at the outset here. So S3 buckets are essentially the storage device for all of your cloud logs. For all of your CloudTrail logs, but they can also be used for things like front ends for images, serving static files. They're really just a storage for static files, but they're really useful for actual logs, including CloudTrail logs. So we're going to be setting up not only a CloudTrail log trail, but a CloudWatch group that's going to then ingest and incorporate all of our CloudTrail logs into a specific group that we can then action on later. But we're also going to have an S3 bucket where all of this stuff is going to be stored so it can be queried later. So in the next video, I'm actually going to show you guys how to look for certain event patterns in those logs to then cover some of the CIS framework rules. But if we were to look at the actual framework now, what we're going to be covering is directly correlated to the actual CIS framework. So if I come to the benchmark rules here, let's put that back up there. Okay. So there's a few of them here that we're going to actually be correlating to, and I can show you guys on the side. So here are the few. So the CIS framework requires that we do a few things with monitoring and logging because, as I said, it's going to be the basis of all of the things that you're doing in the account from a CIS or from a compliance framework perspective. So what we have to do is we have to, for 2.1, we have to ensure CloudTrail is enabled in all regions. For 2.2, we have to ensure CloudTrail log file validation is enabled. And infrastructure as code makes this really, really easy to reproduce and to have a centralized template around what exactly is in your account. So you can then go back and look and say, this is what we have deployed. We should add here. We should take away here. And then 2.3 is going to be ensure the S3 bucket that stores the CloudTrail logs is not publicly accessible. Again, another thing that we can do directly in infrastructure as code. 2.4, another thing we can do directly in infrastructure as code. 2.6, another thing we can do directly as infrastructure as code. And then there's also another one here that I want to point out. Where is it? Where have you gone? Okay, so 2.4 is where the actual CloudTrail integrated with CloudWatch logs is going to come into. It might seem like kind of a juvenile rule to put in there, but it's really, really helpful when you're going to be getting to all the other rules such as 3.1 to, 4.1. So it's a lot of rules that it helps facilitate. So with that in mind, that's directly what we're going to be correlating our actual infrastructure as code to. So if we start to actually write our infrastructure here, what we're going to create first is we're going to create our actual S3 bucket we're going to store our logs into. Now we can call this, again, I'm using TypeScript, so it's going to be different syntax if you're using Python, but the actual themes around what's happening here are going to be the same. So if I go to and create an S3 bucket, I can create one CIS compliance, and I always use camel case, but again, if you're using Python, feel free to use whatever you have to use. CIS compliance bucket, and I'm going to have to actually import a library here, and it's going to be for S3, and I can install this with npm. It's pretty straightforward. So if I do that, then I come to the top here, and I declare new s3.bucket, and then I can pass it some properties that's going to really tell me what's going on in this bucket. So I can do, CIS compliance bucket is going to be the string name of the actual bucket. And then I think I might need to pass it some properties because, a lot of times you want to use non-physical names in the CDK because if you're deploying infrastructure over time, you don't want the names to be the same because they could error out because the CDK is going to look in memory and see that that bucket is already deployed. So you're going to want to actually use something called physical names here. And this is another library that comes in from the actual CDK core libraries here. I don't like using that. We can use this. Okay, so let's set the physical name to generate if needed. Now, what this is going to do is if it finds something that's the same physical name as this string here, it's going to generate a hash at the end of the bucket that's then going to actually just add some random numbers to the end of the bucket. So if it finds one that's the same, it's still going to deploy the infrastructure, which is very, very helpful. So if we come down, we actually now want to create a CloudWatch group, which is where our actual logs are going to be grouped and living. So we can come here, we can create a variable that's CIS compliance log group. And we're going to have to actually import another library here. And I'll actually leave all the links for the libraries that I'm importing. Obviously, for the sake of time, I can't show you guys exactly where I'm getting everything, but it's all in one concise part of the actual CDK documentation. So I'm going to import logs because that's what log group is going to be using. I'm going to install it down below using npm. Let me take away that little apostrophe there. So now that we actually have imported our logs library, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually specify some properties. Now, again, these are all in the CDK docs as you see here, and I'll definitely be leaving a link to this in the description below, like I said. Oops, sorry, what a sick background I have there. But there's going to be some basic properties that are going to help us actually be compliant with the CIS framework and also just general best practice that we can pass to the actual properties of the log group. So once we specify that this is a log group, what we're going to want to do is just pass this, which is the constructor, and then we're going to do CIS compliance log group as the name. And then let's pass some properties here. So one of them is going to be the actual log group name. And again, I always just generate this as a generated physical name if needed, just so it doesn't error out the actual deployment. And then for the retention, this is going to be how long the actual log group is going to keep hold of the logs that we're specifying. So for this, I'm going to specify a retention policy of 1 year, because I like to keep my logs for more than a year, just in case something happens. Then you can have undisclosed just access to all of the logs that went in and out of that actual log group. So now it's time to actually generate the CloudTrail itself. And the CloudTrail, or the service CloudTrail, is just going to be the general logging service for the entirety of AWS. Now, I know sometimes people get confused with CloudWatch and CloudTrail. CloudWatch is the grouping service, but CloudWatch is facilitated by CloudTrail, which is going to log all API calls within your regions, within your actual environment. And there's a few things that you need to specify. But first, we need to actually grab the CloudTrail library so we can then use some of the properties that are in there. And we can do another npm install here. And one of the things that I will say at the outset here is the biggest issue you're going to have with the actual CDK is package management. And I think the CDK v2 does a really good job of, helping with this, but I also have not used it yet because I'm actually scared that it's going to break some of the things that I've been using. So I just haven't done it. Oh, I think I actually need to fix this import real quick. Let's import everything. Star as CloudTrail from... and we're good to go. There we go. So let's actually create a CloudTrail, and then I'll show you some of the properties that we can specify to actually get more in compliance with the CIS framework and just best practices, like I said before. This is going to be super useful for just getting an understanding of what's actually happening in your environment. And let's set it up. So I'm creating a variable called CIS compliance CloudTrail, and then I'm going to add some properties to it, and I have to specify the actual service and then the property trail. And then just like before, I'm creating a string for the name of it. And I always capitalize all my letters in the actual creation of the name. Just what I like to do. I like to do camel case and then Pascal case for everything else. So if I specify properties, sorry, I need a curly bracket. Okay, so I'm going to specify the bucket first. Now that bucket is going to be the same bucket that I declared up here. And what that's going to do is that's going to make sure that the CloudTrails from here are getting stored in that bucket, which is a requirement for the CIS compliance framework. So I can just add that variable name there, which is beautiful. And then I can add the actual CloudWatch group, which is going to be the second property under that. So let me add CIS compliance log group. So let's go over that for a second. What I just did from top to bottom is I created a bucket, and then I actually added the compliance log group with a retention policy of 1 year after that. And then for the CloudTrail, some of the properties that are needed, and this would be one-to-one example of what you would have to do in the console, just this is going to be a reproducible template. So I had to specify the bucket to store the CloudTrails in. Then I had to create a log group for those CloudTrails, which is not only CIS compliant, but also best practice required in the actual AWS environment itself. Okay, my computer crashed for a second there, but we're back. So like I was saying, I just specified the bucket and the CloudWatch group. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to specify the actual CloudWatch retention for the trail itself, meaning that the CloudWatch trails are going to be specifying the retention as well. Now this is a required property. So again, we're just going to do logs, retention days, and then we're going to do 1 year. Put a comma there, and let's add some more properties. Now, as you guys remember in the actual CIS compliance framework, and all of these correlate back directly to the actual framework itself. So if we go back here and we look at this, the next property that we're going to be passing is something called file validation. And it's going to be rule 2.2 of the actual CIS framework. So we're covering a ton of rules right now just with this simple service that we're setting up. So if we add another property called enable file validation, and if you're using VS Code, all of this is going to kind of complete for you, which is pretty nice. We're going to enable those file validations. Then we're going to make sure that the CloudTrail is logging to all regions by specifying a property called isMultiRegion trail, and we're going to say true on that one as well. And if you look back at the actual CIS compliance framework, that's going to be another one. So if we come here to 2.1, ensure CloudTrail is enabled in all regions. That's regardless if you actually use that region or not. Because for example, if someone spins up some sort of infrastructure that's not in the region that you're specifically using, you're still going to want to know that that infrastructure is there because it could be a security risk. Now, the next property we're going to pass is something called send to CloudWatch logs. We're going to specify true. And then we're going to specify the actual trail name itself. And we'll name this CIS compliance CloudTrail. Okay, so now the final thing we're going to want to do is add some sort of security to the actual S3 bucket itself that's storing our CloudTrail logs. And this is going to be in compliance with the actual rules 2.3 on S3 buckets and for 2.6. This is just going to make sure that people can't publicly access our actual bucket. We're going to have some sort of triggers around that bucket so people can't just come from the web and look at the actual logs that are within our bucket, because that's a huge security risk. So what we're going to do is we're going to block public access, or add a property to the CIS compliance bucket we were working on before that's then specified for the CloudTrail. And we're going to say block public access, and then we're going to create a new S3 object here for block public access. Let's create that object. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do block public ACLs true. We're going to do a block public policy. We're going to set that to true. We're going to ignore public ACLs as well, set that to true. And then we're also going to restrict public buckets and set that to true. So this means that not only are we blocking any sort of requests or access or IP addresses that are trying to actually come in or be attached to our bucket from other engineers in our environment, but we're also going to make it so that people actually are restricted from creating public buckets for this specific bucket itself. Now, if we want to actually go and deploy this infrastructure, it's going to be a really, really simple process, and this is really the beauty of using the actual AWS CDK. So if we come to our actual console here, we're going to look in CloudFormation, because the CDK is essentially sugar syntax CloudFormation that offers assets, and assets are going to be talked about later on in the videos because they help you create bigger lambdas and things like that. But if we actually come here, we see that we have two CloudFormation stacks already deployed. We're going to want to actually delete this stack because it's called the CDK toolkit, and it's going to be helping us do something called bootstrapping. And I want to show you guys that process of actually bootstrapping your CDK, because that's where assets come into play in the later stages of this video series. Okay, so once that's deleted, what we want to do is we want to come back to our actual editor here, and we want to do something called bootstrap. So actually the first thing we should do to make sure that all this code is going to be working, we want to do a CDK list. Now the reason we want to do that is because if the code actually works, it's going to display our actual stack here, and our stack is going to be named exactly what we've called it in the parent class here. But if it doesn't work, it's going to show an error of some sort. So now that that works, that's a pretty good sign. It still could break on the actual deployment, but I don't think so. So now we can run our CDK bootstrap command. Oh, we spelled bootstrap wrong. And what this is going to do is it's going to bootstrap some assets into the account that we have authenticated in our actual AWS CLI. Now, those assets are going to allow us to do a few different things that CloudFormation restricts us from doing. So it's really important that you not only understand what bootstrapping is, but you also bootstrap your accounts, because the CDK will not work without the bootstrapped assets. When this comes to scale and actually having multiple accounts you want to bootstrap, what you want to do is you want to use some sort of bash scripting to actually script out the bootstrapping of all your accounts, and then script out your deployments if you can't put them under an AWS organization or something of that sort. So after this is done bootstrapping, we're going to be able to directly deploy our CDK stack that we just created for monitoring and logging. So the bootstrapping was successful. And now if we look back in our account here, we should have another CloudFormation stack for the... So now we should have an actual S3 bucket called the CDK toolkit staging bucket. And there's not going to be anything in here right now, but when we do use assets in our CDK stacks, they're going to be deployed here almost as like image assets that are publicly accessible in a React project. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but think of them in that manner. So now that we're all set up to deploy, we're going to do another CDK list. And this is so I can actually just grab the name of the stack, because it doesn't have an autocomplete, which is one thing that I think the CDK should actually have. But we're going to grab that stack name, and we're just going to do a CDK deploy, and we're actually going to copy that stack name into the terminal, and we're going to hit enter. Now, if this all goes according to plan, what we should have in our account after this is we should have an S3 bucket. Oops, sorry. Forgot about this. The really cool thing about the CDK is it shows you the changes that you're making based on the previous stack. So say I wanted to make some changes to the stack I have here and I've already deployed it. It's going to show me those changes in the terminal and say, hey, are you okay with these changes? And you can hit yes, like you can in this case. But at the end of this, what we should have is we should have a S3 bucket with various public blocking permissions that help us secure that bucket so it can't be publicly accessed. We're going to have a CIS compliance log group that's going to hold our actual CloudTrail logs that we're going to need for most of the actual compliance work we're going to be doing. And we're going to have a compliance CloudTrail that's going to set up the basis of all API calls and being able to view them and then later visualize them in our actual account. So I will be back in a second when this actually deploys, but what you're going to see here in the terminal is actually pretty cool. It's pretty verbose in the logs that it gives back to you as the engineer or as the user. And once this deploys, I will see you guys in a second. Okay, so now that we've actually successfully deployed our CloudFormation stack or CDK stack, and I really want to specify that this is not one-to-one with CloudFormation. There are going to be differences from the CDK. I think they're improvements, but you need to do a little bit of tweaking with usability, whereas CloudFormation is just a vanilla CloudFormation template that comes in YAML that you can straight up deploy. I think the CDK is a little more verbose and has a little bit more of a programmatic flair to it in the logic that you can actually create. So it's going to be a bit better. But CloudFormation is super easy to use. It just has a lot of restrictions of what you can and can't do. So if your stack deploys correctly, what you're going to see is this check mark here, and then you're going to see the R into the actual CloudFormation stack that you just deployed. Like I said, not one-to-one, but it still deploys as CloudFormation technically. So if I come to my console here and I go to the CloudFormation service, what you're going to see is the CloudFormation Compliance CIS baseline stack. And you're going to be able to click into this. You can see an overview of it, when it was deployed, when it was changed, and you can see a template of it here. And then if I actually go to the services that we've created, you're going to be able to see those as well. So let's check really quickly. The S3 bucket is going to be called CIS Compliance Bucket. Now if I check here, we have the Cloud Compliance Baseline. The stack is always going to be before the resource. And then we have the CIS Compliance Bucket right here. Then we have our AWS logs that we just created. Then we have our account number. That's the account we're in. Then we have our CloudTrail here. And this should populate in about 5 to 10 minutes with all the logs that are going on in your account. Obviously, if there's nothing going on in your account, it's not being used, you're not going to get some logs. But if we go to the other services that we created, such as CloudTrail, you're going to be able to see the trail that you set up. So CIS Compliance CloudTrail is now logging. And if we click into that, we're going to see the actual log group that we created here. And if we go to the CloudWatch log service, you're going to be able to see that as well. Awesome. So now we have the log group. It's set to 12 months of retention. And the next part of this video series is going to be me showing you guys metric filters, which is going to cover about another 10 rules of the CIS compliance stack. But that's for another video. But this is the basis for all of the CIS compliance that you're going to be using or that you're going to be automating within your account. So really monitoring and logging can seem simple and can seem like a basic concept. But when you put it into cloud perspective or in the cloud environment, it's really the basis of all fundamental things that you're going to be doing in your environment. Now, in order to show you guys exactly what's happening in the actual S3 bucket that we just created, I'm going to have to wait about 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to be able to show you guys the logs that you can actually query from this bucket. Okay, so now that our actual bucket has populated some logs, the way you would get to these actual logs is like I showed you before. You would come to the bucket that you specified, Cloud Compliance Baseline Compliance Bucket. That's a mouthful, but you would come there, you would go into your AWS logs object, you would select the right account. And the reason you want to have these account numbers is when you're using organizations, you can have multiple accounts actually logging to the same bucket. So we're going to select the only account we have here. We're going to click CloudTrail, and we're going to click one of these regions. So these are the regions that have populated so far, and that's just because I was making example API calls in those regions. But usually what you would see is all of the regions populated. It just takes a little bit longer for the other ones, but they're going to slowly roll in now. So if we go into US West 2 and we check out the date here, keep clicking through, we can actually go in here and open the actual log group here, and boom, we have all of our logs that we could need. And this might look like a lot, but the actual work we're going to be doing in the next video to actually trigger on specific metric filters is going to help a lot here. All right, so I hope episode number 2 was really helpful in a more pragmatic and technical sense. We really showed how to set up monitoring and logging in your AWS environment as a whole. This is going to be the baseline, like I said, for all the rest of the work that we're going to be doing here in the series, and it's going to become very robust as you go through. Now, the end goal of this is to have a baseline template, such as the one you see here on your screen for the CDK, with all of the code that you would need to present as a full-scale project for your GitHub or for your resume. You really are going to have to understand what's happening here in order to use it to your advantage. But that is the end goal of this video series, to not only get you guys to understand compliance in the cloud, but also to understand actually how to automate it and what automating it actually looks like. So if you like this video, definitely give a like on the video below, not to be redundant. Leave a comment if you have any questions, or reach out to me in Discord or Instagram or Twitter if you have any other questions or feedback. I would prefer if you guys join the Discord and just reached out to me there, so it's not just my opinion and others can chime in, because I'm, again, not always right, not trying to be the source of truth on this subject.